Before we dive into this nightmare of a story, hit subscribe, because once you hear what really happens inside Rikers Island, you'll understand why every shadow in New York is a secret. The first thing you notice about Rikers isn't the razor wire, or the old steel doors, or even the endless echo of metal clashing on metal. It's a silence, a heavy, suffocating silence that settles over the island like a warning, a silence that even the city's loudest sirens can't penetrate. And that silence hung thick in the air on the night everything went wrong. The clock had just hit 2:14 a.m. when the emergency lights flickered across the Robert N. Dewarren complex, one of Rikers' most notoriously unstable facilities. For months, the jail had been on the brink. Chronic staff shortages, overcrowded dorms, and rising violence that had already pushed the city into multiple investigations. New York newspapers were calling Rikers a humanitarian crisis. But inside these walls, it felt more like a powder keg waiting for a spark. Officer Jordan Hale, a fictional composite character based on real correctional officers' testimonies, was in the middle of his overnight shift. He had been on duty for 14 hours, not by choice, but because staffing had collapsed so drastically that forced overtime was becoming an everyday reality. Even when officers were exhausted, even when they were barely functioning, the jail didn't stop. It couldn't. Hale stepped into dorm C-74 and felt the temperature shift. The unit was supposed to hold 50 men. Tonight it held 86. Bunk beds shoved into corners. Mattresses on the floor. Tension so thick it felt alive. This was Rikers in real life, a place where even the fire exits were blocked because there simply wasn't enough space. As Hale walked the tier, inmates watched him with half-lidded eyes. Some exhausted, some angry, some calculating. One wrong move, one misunderstanding, and the entire room could explode. And that's when he noticed him. A young inmate, barely 19. Miguel Ortiz, fictional, but inspired by dozens of real young men who spoke out about Rikers' brutal environment. He was sitting on the edge of his bunk, staring at the floor, shaking slightly. Hale crouched down. "You good?" he asked. Miguel didn't look up. "They said something's happening tonight," he whispered. "Something big." Hale felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. Rumors at Rikers weren't just rumors. Not here. Not on an island that had seen riots, escapes, emergency lockdowns, and federal warnings. What kind of something? Hale asked. Miguel swallowed hard. They said, "The lights. Watch the lights." Before Hale could ask more, the power dropped. A loud, violent click. Then darkness. Only blue emergency strips along the hallway flickered on, painting every face in cold electric shadows. Shouting erupted immediately. Metal clanged. Someone pounded on a gate. Hale heard running. Then a scream. Then another. He reached for his radio. Dead. The battery had been drained hours earlier. Half the equipment in the building wasn't working because maintenance had fallen behind for months. The city kept promising new funding, new reforms, new oversight, but none of that mattered inside a crumbling dorm at 2 a.m. He moved through the dark, one hand on the wall, waiting for his eyes to adjust. Miguel followed close behind. "Officer, what's happening?" "I don't know," Hale muttered. "Stay behind me." A door slammed somewhere deeper in the unit. Then the sound of metal scraping. Slow, deliberate, like someone was dragging something heavy across the floor. Hale's pulse hammered in his ears. Suddenly, a figure appeared at the far end of the hall, a silhouette, tall and unmoving, standing perfectly still beneath the dim blue light. "Who's there?" Hale called out. No response. The figure didn't flinch, didn't breathe, just watched him. Miguel grabbed Hale's sleeve. "That's what I meant," he whispered. "They said after the shift change, somebody was planning something. They said a door was open that should have never been opened." Hale took a cautious step forward, and that's when he noticed something the blue lights were barely revealing. The door behind the silhouette, a secure door, one that was supposed to stay locked at all times, was open just a few inches. If that door was open, something was very, very wrong. And as Hale edged forward, heart pounding, the silhouette finally moved, slowly lifting an arm, pointing deeper into the darkness as if warning him, or inviting him. What he saw when he stepped through that doorway would change the entire investigation of Rikers Island. And it was only the beginning. The door that should never be open. The door groaned as Officer Hale pushed it open, the blue emergency lights casting long, eerie shadows that stretched across the floor like reaching hands. Behind him, Miguel hovered close, his breath quick and shallow. This part of Rikers wasn't supposed to be accessible at night. It was an old service corridor, a relic from decades earlier, sealed off due to safety failures, broken cameras, and half-finished renovation plans that the city never fully funded. Staff joked it was a forgotten artery of the island, but nobody actually went inside. Now, it stood open, inviting, silent. Hale raised his flashlight, one of the few things still working, and a thin beam cut through the darkness. The hallway was colder than the dorm. Dust floated in the air, glittering faintly in the bluish glow. Pipes rattled overhead, the old infrastructure groaning under pressure. Somewhere behind them, a distant alarm chirped, its glitchy tone echoing down the walls like Morse code from a dying machine. Miguel swallowed hard. "Officer," was his plan. Hale didn't answer. He was trying to understand how a secure door, one that required a coded key, could be opened during a short-staffed overnight shift. But then again, Rikers had faced a full-blown staffing crisis for months. Officers calling out, posts unmanned, doors left unsecured because people were covering 3, sometimes 4, stations at once. Maybe it was a mistake, or maybe it wasn't. They walked deeper. Metal clanged behind them, a distant sound, like a gate slamming shut. Hale instinctively reached for his radio again, forgetting it was dead. Miguel tensed. That wasn't from the dorm, that was somewhere else. Hale clicked his flashlight to a wider beam. Ahead of them was a crossroads, 3 branching tunnels lined with peeling paint and rusted pipes. Old signs hung crookedly, pointing to areas no longer in use, storage, maintenance, abandoned offices. But one sign made Hale freeze. Control Room C, restricted access. That room was legendary among staff, not for what was inside, but for how long it had been offline. Years ago, Control Room C oversaw one of the island's main communication networks. But technology updates, budget cuts, and staffing decisions slowly pushed it out of service. Eventually, it became a dead zone, a place where only electricians or emergency responders ever entered. Except tonight, its door was cracked open. Miguel took a step back. "I don't think we should be here." Hale steadied his breathing and approached the room. The door emitted a faint hum, electricity struggling through outdated circuits. He nudged it open with his foot. Inside, the blue emergency lights made every surface look cold and metallic. Dust-covered monitors lined the walls, most dark, a few flickering with static. Thick cables snaked across the floor. Old filing cabinets stood half open, papers spilling out like forgotten secrets. And then Hale noticed something chilling. A monitor in the corner, one that should have been shut down years ago, was on, glowing, displaying live footage. Miguel stepped forward, eyes wide. "Is that the lower yard?" Hale nodded slowly. The camera feed showed the outdoor yard, empty, silent, lit only by the same blue floodlights covering the island. But that wasn't what made Hale's pulse spike. In the center of the yard lay a scattered pile of materials, not weapons, not tools, blueprints. At least, that's what they looked like, sheets of paper fluttering across the concrete, covered in lines, measurements, and highlighted sections. "What is that?" Miguel whispered. Hale leaned closer. It wasn't the yard that was disturbing. It was what the blueprints were for. Sections of the building, old schematics, abandoned corridors, and one page in particular circled in red marker. Mechanical access tunnel, north wing. A tunnel that, if memory served, connected multiple parts of the island. One that hadn't been used in over a decade due to structural damage. But if someone had the plans. A sudden crash jolted the room. The monitor flickered. Miguel grabbed Hale's arm. "Officer, look!" On the screen, a shadow crossed the yard. Tall, slow, deliberate, not running, not hiding, just moving, with purpose. Hale stared at the monitor, a cold weight settling in his stomach. Someone was out there. Someone who had accessed restricted areas. Someone who knew the old tunnels, old systems, old doors. And they weren't acting alone. Because next to the blueprints, barely visible under the flickering floodlights, was a small metallic device. A key, not a modern one. An old Rikers mechanical key, the kind the jail phased out years ago. Someone had been collecting these, studying them, tracking access points. Miguel whispered, "Officer, what if this whole blackout was just a distraction?" Hale clenched his jaw. It wasn't a rumor. It wasn't paranoia. Something bigger was unfolding on Rikers Island, and they had walked straight into the middle of it. Then the lights went completely black. The blueprint in the dark. The lights died with a sharp snap, plunging control room into absolute darkness. For a moment, neither Hale nor Miguel breathed. The blue emergency strips that had lit the holes earlier weren't coming back this time. Whatever backup power Rikers had left, it had just failed. Hale squeezed a flashlight until his knuckles whitened, flicking the switch. Nothing. Dead. Miguel whispered, "Officer, they killed the last generator." Hale didn't respond. He could feel the building settling, that strange, hollow tension that happens in a complete blackout, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Then, footsteps. Soft, careful, coming from the hallway outside the control room. Miguel pressed himself against the cabinet. Someone's out there. Hale's heart hammered, but his mind was steady. Rikers had faced dozens of internal crises, staff shortages that left entire posts unmanned, broken systems patched together with temporary fixes, overcrowded dorms that pushed tensions to the breaking point. But this? Someone had planned tonight. Step by step, a faint glow appeared under the doorway, not white, not blue, a muted, flickering orange, like the glow of a small handheld device. Not fire, a screen. Hale grabbed Miguel's shoulder and pulled him behind one of the old consoles. The footsteps stopped directly at the door. The glow dimmed. Whoever stood there was listening. Hale held his breath. After a long silence, the footsteps moved away. Slow, pacing, as if counting the doors, learning the layout. Miguel mouthed, "What now?" Hale pointed to a second exit, a small maintenance hatch on the side of the room. It hadn't been used in years, but with the main hallway compromised, it was their only option. He knelt and tugged the panel. Rust crackled. It resisted. He pulled harder, and it finally gave way with a metallic pop that echoed through the room like a gunshot. Both men froze. The footsteps stopped, then turned back toward them, faster this time. Inside, Hale whispered sharply. Miguel crawled through the hatch first. Hale followed, pulling the panel closed just as a control room door handle clicked. They entered a narrow service crawl space. Dust coated the floor. Pipes hissed above them, carrying the last breaths of a dying electrical system. The space was pitch black. Miguel whispered, "Where does this go?" Hale answered quietly, "If the map is right, the mechanical access tunnel." The same tunnel circled on the blueprints. They crawled forward, each movement echoing louder than the last. Behind them, the control room door creaked open. A faint light spilled in, the same dim orange glow from before. Someone was searching. "Keep moving," Hale whispered. They crawled until the passage widened and dropped into a full-height tunnel, tall enough to stand, lined with concrete, marked with old repair numbers. The air smelled damp, heavy, forgotten. This was the heart of Rikers' old infrastructure, the kind the public never saw, the kind inmates weren't supposed to know existed. But somebody did. As they moved deeper, the faint hum of machinery reached them, not from the building, but ahead, inside the tunnel. A voice echoed, distorted by the concrete walls. "No, not yet. Wait for the signal." Hale pulled Miguel behind a support beam. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber filled with shadows, and in the center, illuminated by two small battery-powered lanterns, stood three figures. Not inmates. Their clothing was civilian, maintenance uniforms. But Hale didn't recognize them. One of them held a tablet glowing orange. Miguel whispered, "They are not from the dorm." Hale studied them, heart pounding. The lantern light revealed what they were gathered around. A portable case on the floor containing tools, old lock components, and something that looked disturbingly familiar. Mechanical keys, not random ones. Keys organized by building section. The tallest figure tapped the tablet. Once the blackout hits every building, the access points reset to mechanical mode. We move then. Hale's blood ran cold. This wasn't an escape. This was access to what he couldn't yet see. But whatever these people wanted, it wasn't freedom. The shortest figure pointed toward the northern end of the tunnel. We only need 10 minutes inside the archive room. 10 minutes, and we walk out with everything. Archive room. Hale knew exactly what they meant. The administrative archives, a records room holding decades of sensitive material, facility incidents, internal investigations, security audits, structural reports, documents powerful people might want to disappear. Suddenly, the taller figure froze. Did you hear that? Hale held Miguel still. A single droplet of water fell from a pipe behind them. The sound echoed like a footstep. The figures grabbed their lights. Hale and Miguel locked eyes. There was no choice. If those people made it to the archives, whatever they were after would vanish forever. Hale whispered, "We have to stop them." Miguel shook with fear. "Officer, how? We don't even have power." Hale stared into the darkness ahead, the tunnel stretching into uncertainty. "We don't need power," he said. "We just need to get there first." Behind them, the mysterious group began moving, and the chase through the forgotten veins of Rikers Island began. But by sunrise, the truth behind the blackout would shake New York City far beyond the prison walls.